take it home, well, you spread it around. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. That's what election day is all about. And the biggest gun we got is called the ballot box. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. And she'll bring some new ones in, and they will start the show again. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out. It's a bunch of clowns you voted in. Election day is coming around again. And if you don't like it now, you can change it anyhow. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. We'll start the show again and bring some new ones in. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out. Vote them out. And when we're done, we'll sing and dance and shout. Then we'll bring some new ones in, and we'll start the show again. But if you don't like who's in there, vote them out. And if you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Texas. Thank you, Beto. All the way, buddy. We love y'all. Thank you.
From the 2018 Special Debate Project, brought to you by WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This episode, the Alaska debate, and we'll give you some backgrounder using the Anchorage Daily. We covered elections in Alaska when the Republican candidate at the time, Lisa Murkowski, was basically rooted out of the Republican Party. She ran a write-in campaign, and with the help of Aboriginals or Native Americans, she regained her Senate seat. And it was Gunner Joe was there at the time. I guess Gunner Joe has disappeared from Alaskan politics. I recall back in the 80s, we went out to Alaska to assist in a legislative race out there. It was in the Bush area. I don't recall exactly. I think it was around Juneau. But anyway, of a native that was running for the legislature there in Alaska. So we had some exposure to Alaskan politics many, many years in the past. But this race is interesting in that two people basically exited the race. They had a lieutenant governor named Maylott, Brian Maylott. He abruptly resigned his lieutenant governor's and his re-election effort there in Alaska. Bill Walker, he's the current governor of Alaska. He is an independent, dropped his re-election bid and through his support to Mark Begich. I always mispronounce his name. His background was at one time he was the United States Senator from Alaska and the mayor of Anchorage. And the Republican Dunleavy here, it was he, like many people, went to Alaska in the 80s, and he was out in the bush. He married evidently a native Alaskan, and they stayed out there, and now I guess he's living in what he calls urban Alaska, around the Anchorage area, somewhere there. Anyway, nonetheless, bring this up to date. There's 3 weeks until the election, and 2,300 absentee ballots already mailed out. Walker's decision to step away from his campaign marks a significant last-minute change in the battle to become the next governor of Alaska. Some key takeaways here, and we're covering a number of elections. Next up will be a debate between our own Elizabeth Warren in the Commonwealth for the Senate and the other candidate. I don't remember his name. I'll have to look at it there. I've not heard of him before. He is a state legislator. But what you want to look at here are the positions of the various candidates, particularly the Republican candidates. They have their talking points, which are basically universal. Tax cuts, economy, simplification of regulations. This is on the state basis of people that are running, say, for governor. But in the Senate race, we talked about this on the week that was and on Friday Jobber, 2 programs also from WBRN Radio, about the Republicans and a central issue, and it is a very important issue in Alaska, the Affordable Care Act, or health care in particular. And the Republicans have now shifted their position. This is an old tactic going back to the late 1970s, where you take the position of a candidate and you co-opt that position as one of your own positions. Now, the difference here is there's a marked modification because the Republicans in the House and in the Senate have already went on record. In fact, they spent, since the creation of the Affordable Care Act, trying to dismantle it. And the current Republican political class, under Ryan, who is retired in the House, and under McConnell, the leader of the Senate, had made it their priority to literally appeal the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. And as President Obama would say, he likes that term, and so do we. But the Republicans kind of shy away from using it. They used it to try to defeat it when they got the Republican president, DJ Trump, in. They were going to totally dismantle it, and they have done a lot to do it because they control the levers of power in the Medicare and Medicaid services, such as the amount of money that they spend on advertising. But it's kind of an interesting situation. This is the period for open enrollment. It's also the period for enrollment in various Medicare Advantage plans. I want people to know that. The landscape has changed somewhat. But in Alaska, they are talking about the Alaskan Medicaid program and how to expand it. Alaska is a very interesting setup there. A lot of it is on tourism, a lot on fishing, and then you have the remote villages that affect the Aboriginals. Against that setting is where the governor's race is. It's now a 2-person race between the Democratic candidate Begich, anyway, and the Republican candidate Dunleavy. So thus, with Bill Walker exiting the race and creating this 2-man race, they had a debate at the Deemer Einer Civic and Convention Center. That is in Alaska. Before the forum started, a crowd of hundreds from across the state. Every dream I've made as your governor, I have made the basis of what I believe is best for Alaska. This is Bill Wilson speaking. With that said, effectively today I'm suspending my campaign for re-election. So he announced that at the center. This is Native Tribes, an emotional walker in a blue cassock. I suppose that's a native dress, with only 18 days, and there's less than that now. Has become clear I cannot win in a free person race. Now, this is another important takeaway for many candidates that are similarly have similar political positions, that there should be some type of agreement made to let the stronger candidate come forward. And this in Alaska, to congratulate them on making that choice. Many Alaskans about whom have a better chance of competing against this Dunleavy here. And the determination was made that at this point, Begich, I keep mispronouncing his name. His name is hard. Has the best odds, Walker said. Both Begich and Dunleavy were in the crowd watching along with their families and campaign staffs. Dunleavy watched the speech intensely and leaned forward, showing no reaction. He stood during a standing ovation when Walker introduced his wife, Donna Walker, and remained in his seat at the end of the speech as the crowd gave Walker an ovation. Of course, the ballots have already been printed here. Walker, Republican turned independent, and this was an interesting election there, was elected in 2014 on a so-called unity ticket with Mailot, a Democrat, and defeated incumbent Sean Purnell. Now, Purnell was appointed by none other than Sarah Palin, who is forgotten these days. But it's been 10 years since she made a national run, and I doubt if she's doing any more books or TV shows. Now in Alaska, there is no state tax there. Walker entered office facing low petroleum prices, multi-million-dollar budget deficit shortfalls. Some voters never forgave him for pushing for an income tax and pushing a spending plan that led to a small amount of the permanent fund, a dividend check, a smaller amount. Excuse me, Alaskans get a dividend check in good times, and in bad, they get less, obviously, in bad. Election day, of course, the 6th. Early voting starts on Monday. It's already started, I believe, and it will remain on the ballot, the Mailot ticket, which has already been certified printed according to the Alaskan Division of Elections. And this, as far as Begich's positions, many of them are a little bit different from Walker's, but Walker said, citing his support of a Medicaid expansion in pursuit of an Alaskan natural gas pipeline project and state spending on rural Alaska and education. An example given in a debate, it takes up to 2 years for a nursing candidate to get into a nursing school in Alaska. That is preposterous. And of course, once they complete their training, they are automatically hired. William Mayo, he's of the Alaskan Federation of Native Boards, co-chaired, said to the crowd, "This is a historic moment for folk, and this is a historic moment for the state of Alaska." Reporters followed Walker out of the ballroom after his speech into the diner in center hallway for a makeshift press conference there. We don't have his press conference, but we may get it. The right decision for Alaska. This is a continuous thing here. After Walker announced, U.S. Representative Don Young and his Democratic challenger Elise Gavin debated, and Begich and Dunleavy faced off in the first one-on-one debate. Aside from Walker's absence, the forum did not stray significantly from what Alaskans had seen from the candidates, just that Begich brought up that Walker had dropped out of the race. So we've covered this center many times. Mark Begich and Dunleavy, live candidates there. Let's go into a little bit more of this. You'll get to debate in a few minutes here. Another article With Election Day closing, a new Alaskan governor race takes a shape. This is Anzak, I suppose how I pronounce her name. And it was published, according to this, 17 days ago. This is on Friday that Bill Walker made his announcement. The free race has left some voters federally over whether to support Walker and independent or Mark Begich. It is now much clearer head-to-head race. There's no doubt about that. Walker dropped his bid. Walker's signs removed. The timing of the Mellett quitting the race complicates voting. Though they are no longer running for re-election, it's too late, obviously, to take their names off the ballot. Their names will be on the ballot, but people understand what's going on. Walker's announcement on Friday, his campaign team was busy fielding incoming messages on Facebook. Facebook and social media is a very important part of Alaska. Shifted two ways, as some voters, the choice was clear after Walker's announcement, which he delivered an emotional speech at the Alaskan Federation of Natives. That is the 52nd annual convention. Andrew Hawkrow, I think, a former Republican state representative, executive director of the Anchorage Community Development Authority, was planning to vote for Walker, said now he is definitely voting for Begich. So, the cornerstone of Dunleavy's platform is restoring a full permanent fund dividends to Alaska after Walker reduced the amount of the payoff. Halcrow worries that Dunleavy's governorship would grow a budget deficit. Now, this is something that you will see happen throughout these particular governor's debates. We're thinking about the debate in Minnesota and several others where Republicans, through their tax cuts, same as happening on the national level with the Trump administration, deficits are growing. And the problem is in Alaska and many of the states, they have to balance their budget automatically. Thus, you have state cuts in services, etc., to rectify what has happened. The whole idea of spending cuts and these various adjustments, like he's pushing the permanent fund, is a dividend at a full rate. When petroleum prices and gas prices are higher, the fund people get more dividend from $1,000, $1,500 to I think maybe around $2,000 each, and every citizen in Alaska will get that. But the problem is with the state government within a vast territory like Alaska, the need for state government to do things such as health care, education. The primary move is there. If you'll note in the Dunleavy debate, Dunleavy is talking about law enforcement solutions, crime in I'm assuming in Anchorage and those areas, and crime out in the bush, which for the most part are parts of Aboriginal reservations, etc., and where the tribes play a very, very important part here because they are self-governed on the treaties with the U.S. So this complicates more of Alaska. Of course, you also have these massive lands that are owned by the federal government, and under Dunleavy, he'd want to drill more. Now, all of those are short-term situations. They create some jobs. No doubt, nobody's going to argue against that when they are starting out. But because of modern sabermetric techniques that are now used for extracting the petroleum or natural gas, fewer people, once the facilities are built, actually man those facilities. And they affect the ecological situation which is fishing and tourism. That brings in more money to Alaska on a long-term and stabilized situation. Beautiful place to visit. If you have not been there, you want to go and visit. Let's move on here. It's not clear yet what the governor's announcement means for Unite Alaska, the independent expenditure group that formed to support his re-election. Independent expenditure groups can't coordinate with campaigns. But Unite Alaska has raised more than $1 billion on behalf of Walker. The Alaskan AFL-CIO, incidentally, those unions are very, very strong in Alaska. They had endorsed Walker, and Begich is keeping his scheduled upcoming debate informed, as according to his campaign manager, is reaching out to event hosts to reaffirm their attendance and desire to speak to groups. Meanwhile, the Alaskan Democratic Party is starting a big push to get the message out that Walker is out of the race, and he's using every available means, including phone calls, text messages, door knocking, social media, to ensure people, even though Walker's name's not on the ballot, he is no longer is on the ballot. He is no longer in the race. So let me go to the front page of the Alaskan Daily here. The big story here, and this, I think this is the one we just read, with Election Day closing, a new governor's race takes shape. I think this is the one we just read. This is 17 hours ago, not quite a day ago, so it would have been published on a Saturday, I assume. And I've always been a stickler for dates. And we're not getting the precise date here. Let me just check one more thing. Some polling out in Alaska. We'll go to that in just a second here. Just looking at the news, Alaska effectively gets the same kind of news that 3.5 million pounds of Alaskan moose meat goes into freezers each year, and I would imagine some of those places you could literally freeze it outdoors. Alaskans have elections, but election campaign shakeups on the last frontier are the rule there. So, anyway. Walker's last bold act as governor allows Alaskans to choose their future. This is an editorial here, I assume. And this is an opinion column here. The editorial board of the Anchorage, that's 20 hours ago, was it. On Friday afternoon, Walker shocked attendees at the Alaska Federation of Natives annual convention by announcing he would suspend his campaign. The move kept a wild week that had already seen a surprise resignation of Lieutenant Governor Brian Mallott for inappropriate comments he made to some woman. There's no question the effect on the governor's race is monumental. Less than 3 weeks to go. The Unity ticket, Governor Walker himself was a beneficiary of an untenable freeway race in 2014, having withdrawn from the Republican primary to run as an independent. Walker was a long shot to prevail and viewed by many as a spoiler who ensured that then Governor Purnell would coast to an easy re-election until he and Democratic candidate Mallott joined a force to create what was called a Unity ticket. Lisa Murkowski's write-in, we mentioned that before, has always been too close to the middle of the road for those in the Republican Party's right wing. Her campaign for a second term came to a temporary halt in 2010 when the hard right candidate Uncle Joe Miller defeated her in the primary. This is where Murkowski embraced a near unprecedented right in a campaign. The only successful previous right in effort was in South Carolina in 1954 by none other than Mr. Strom Thurmond himself, the late Strom Thurmond. After Miller's campaign was bogged down by allegations of misuse of his office of Fairbanks Borough Attorney and the detainment of an editor for the Alaskan Dispatch who was covering a town meeting. Murkowski won by 4 points. Ted Stevens' trial, he was a former senator from Alaska. And that was in 10 years ago. Was bizarre from the outset. An Alaskan political giant, Ted Stevens, ran his campaign while on trial for making false statements related to improper gifts from an oil field service company owned by Bill Allen. Under other circumstances, Stevens would have coasted to an easy victory on the 20th of October that year, provided the most consequential October surprise in Alaska's history when a jury found Stevens guilty on all 7 counts. Neck-and-neck race there between Stevens and Mark Begich on Election Day, but Begich prevailed weeks later. After the absentee ballots, they're going to be very important here. The victory, the verdict in the case was thrown out in April 2019 after misconduct by the prosecutor. But Stevens' political career was over. He died in an airplane crash. That happens a lot in Alaska. People die in airplane crashes. The wild 1998 governor's race, prior to years there, the Democrat, we remember him, John Latour, faced Democrat Tony Knowles. Latour's campaign was rocked by revelations that his campaign had been largely financed by his wife, and according to Republican leaders, undermined the party's credibility. All the way back to Hinkle, 1990, shake-up, he vacated his place as an Alaskan Independence Party nominee to clear the way for Wally Hinkle, a late entry. Republican Party's primary was won by a moderate Steganowski. To make matters even more dynamic, Steganowski's running mate Cloghill jumped ship to join the Hinkle ticket. Oh boy, this is typical Alaskan politics. I'm glad we found this. The feat wouldn't be repeated until Walker's independent run in 2014. Alaska's a wild place, and so is politics. There's no guarantees this year. Electoral roller coaster is over, but the dreams of the governor's governor's race to this point has earned a place in a pantheon of campaign upsets that have made campaigns in the last frontier so unpredictable. Dunleavy's final words in the candidates forum: don't be surprised if there are more surprises along the way. So buckle up, this year's drama might not yet be over. Now this is an opinion piece here. We'll put it on Facebook, the Boston Red Facebook, and also on the Boston Red Twitter. So you can see it there, and out in a Twitter world, wherever Twitter world is. And I guess we're going to have to... Oops. Anyway, we'll get it to Twitter in a minute here. So this, we'll go to the Alaskan debate between Mark Begich and the Republican Dunleavy. Enjoy. And we'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on Monday morning. Good day.
Callie, go through each of the questions that we have for you this afternoon. And we will start with Mike Dunleavy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I just want to take a minute to first introduce my wife of 31 years, Rose Satu Newland Dunleavy. She's from the village of Norvik. She's the daughter of Robert Newland and Maggie Newland, have since passed. So we've got a lot of friends and relatives in western Alaska. When I first went to Alaska, I ended up in a beautiful little place called Koyuk, Alaska, on the Seward Peninsula. And it was there that I fell in love with Alaska, fell in love with the people. Spent 6 years there as a teacher, made a lot of friends. Some of the folks are here today. Some have stopped at our booth here all week long, and we've seen them get off the plane. My wife works for Alaska Airlines. She's a ticket agent. And after 6 years, we decided to go north and be close to our family. And so we moved to Kotzebue, where I was a principal, teacher, superintendent. We spent 13 years in Kotzebue, built a house there. Our kids were born in Kotzebue. Our 3 daughters, including my wife, are members of the Norvik tribe. They're members of NANA. Had the fortune this summer, the past 2 summers, of having our 3 daughters. Maggie's 26, Catherine is 21, Seal Ann is 19. They all worked at Red Dog Mine. They all partook in an operation up there that's been ongoing since the 80s. Started with the help of her father, Robert Newland, and many others in the Northwest Arctic. It's brought a lot of prosperity to Alaska. And that's what this campaign is going to be about, is what's Alaska going to look like in the future? Can we marshal and harness our resources like we've done in the past, but can we do it and continue to do it in the future so that we can put people to work, create revenue, and create wealth? I spent 19 years in rural Alaska. Loved it out there. Actually, I wasn't the one that wanted to move to urban Alaska. It was my wife, but I moved with her, obviously, because we've been married for 31 years. But I love it out there. I've got friends out there. And I just want to let you folks know that you've got somebody that understands what it is to live out there. You're going to have a friend in the governor's mansion, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
And I understand that microphone doesn't work. This one does, so I don't know if we can move.
Well, first, thank you very much, Guyana, to all of you. Welcome to an incredible event here. But before I make my comments, I do want to say one other thing, and that is I do want to acknowledge the amazing, courageous action that the governor did. He was about Alaska. I forget, I can't remember which leader said it, but being courageous like that is far and few in politics of today. With the toxic noise you hear every single day, you turn on the news and radio. Actually, I do my best not to watch the news at night anymore because it's just so negative. It doesn't talk about the future. And this election is about the future. But before I go on to additional comments, I have 2 Deborahs in my life now. My first Deborah is my wife, Deborah Benito, who's over here. I want to introduce her if she could just stand up. She's around the edge there with my, and he'll be embarrassed here, my 16-year-old son, who many of you have grown up with over the years. He's hiding over here too, I think. But I also have another Deborah, my Lieutenant Governor running mate, Deborah Call, who is from the Kanik Tribal Council, right over here. Very proud of her. You know, it is an amazing time we live in. We have to think about the future beyond where we are today. We have struggles every single day. We have problems with our education system, highest crime rate in the nation, highest unemployment rate. But there's one thing I've always known, and the governor said it, that all of us, if we would unite, put Alaska first, we can solve these problems no matter how big they are, no matter how small they are, no matter where they are. And in rural Alaska, we have incredible challenges. Making sure our young people stay in the communities, help grow the communities. Making sure we have an education system that's not based on how many kids are in the school, but what is the right education. Making sure it is culturally sensitive. Let me end there, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions, so thank you very much.
Senator Dunleavy. Economists agree that the recent rebound in oil prices are not enough to undo Alaska's damage when it comes to our credit rating and business ratings, or to solve the budget crisis long term. Does your plan for leading Alaska out of its fiscal crisis include additional cuts to state departments? If so, which departments? And specifically, which programs, and how much do you intend to further cut?
Thanks for the question. The first thing I would do, and we're looking at this now, is actually looking at how we can manage the state better. We've gotten a report that, for example, Medicaid and programs in health and social services have overpaid to providers almost $300 million. This approach to government has got to change. We've got to be able to manage our funds better. We have to be able to manage our resources better. I also would be looking at potentially consolidating on a volunteer basis the insurances, for example, for school districts or cities or municipalities to bring them into the state Alaska Care to drive down the cost. There have been estimates that if we do that, we can save anywhere from $100 to $150 million going forward. I would start with these efficiencies first in order to realize some cost savings. We also have, for example, a fast rail study from Palmer to Anchorage, where I live in the valley. We don't need to be paying $4.5 million for a fast rail study at this point when we need money for troopers, we need money for prosecuting attorneys. So we'll be looking at those items first before we really get into talking about any reductions in terms of cuts of programs first.
Thank you. Senator Begich, the same question.
I am not looking at any additional cuts. I look at the state budget has come down to an incredibly low amount. The question is, what are we going to do and how are we going to invest? How do we make the government more efficient? One of the things we have not done in the last several years, we've had an average of about $140 million for a capital investment throughout the state, which is not enough. I've proposed a 6-year plan, taking $70 to $100 million of existing dollars, putting it to debt, and financing a 6-year program of $2 billion over the next 6 years for the state of Alaska, partnering with local communities in needs of water, sewer, bridges, roads, other infrastructure that's critical. Because we have not done the investment. We have deferred maintenance. I just went through the airport coming from a place down in Ketchikan, and it was amazing to see the bucket catching water. This is not the kind of thing we need to be doing. But I also believe there's opportunities to save money in the sense of how we deliver services. If you're an OCS worker today, you go to a home, it's all handwritten on paper. Then they come back and put it into a computer. We can do this better with the technology we have today. We need new ideas and creative ideas of how to make our government more efficient and deliver the services that we all deserve in this state. And that's how I'd approach the budget.
Senator Dunleavy, rural Alaska villages are among the most economically depressed communities in the nation, yet they have the highest per capita fuel costs. Will you utilize Power Cost Equalization Fund to help balance the state budget gap?
I have no intention of changing PCE. I believe that many of our villages could benefit from potentially having gas shipped to the villages, biomass, potentially even coal for some of our isolated villages. But we're going to have to look at each village individually. As was mentioned earlier by Congressman Young, there's opportunities for hydro. We're awash in energy in the state of Alaska. We just have to know how to harness it and where to use it in these particular isolated communities. But again, we have some real opportunities, but my intent is to leave PCE alone.
Thank you. Senator Begich?
No, I don't intend to utilize that money for the general budget. I have to thank Senator Lyman for the foresight to put $1 billion aside to make sure that PCE is funded in perpetuity, which is a critical program for energy. But the biggest challenge we have in rural Alaska is, as you know, PCE helps fund residential, but the businesses don't benefit from that. And when you think about it, you go down to the store, what do you see? High cost of energy for those stores to operate in other businesses. So we need to do something that I think is important, and that is we have to have a robust energy plan, which involves renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, tidal. All these are incredible potential. Alaska has a goal by 2025 to be at 50%. We need to achieve this. I've seen the reductions when people utilize these other energy sources. On top of that, it creates new types of jobs for us. You know, when these wind turbines are built, the people who repair them are not from Alaska. We need to make sure when we do this new energy source that people who live here, work here, are the people who have those jobs. That's what we need to do. And I would disagree. I would just say to Senator Dunleavy, I'm not interested in more coal. We are at ground zero to climate change, and we don't need to add more to our skies here.
The next question concerns education, and it's a two-part question. I'd ask that you keep your answer to one word, and depending on how you answer, we'll have a follow-up. Senator Begich. Enrollment and graduation statistics show that the state's public education system is failing Native children. Do you support the increase in the number of students required to keep a public school open?
No.
Senator Dunleavy?
No.
Okay. There will be no follow-up questions then. However, we'll switch to another topic under education. Can you, Senator Dunleavy, explain your view on the current funding formula?
The formula that's in place with all the factors, it's been in place since 1996. It funds schools across the state of Alaska. One of the things, I want to take a second, one of the things I want to make sure that we clear up is there is a narrative, and it's along these lines, there is a narrative that I want to close down rural schools, the very schools that I worked in, the very schools that my wife went to, that my relatives go to now. The fact of the matter is, what I want to be able to do, especially when you're dealing with small communities that have a 1 or 2 teacher school for high schoolers, and I've had this discussion with folks for some time, is in the hub areas, beef up those high schools that are in the hub areas, get some dorm facilities in the hub areas so that kids can come into the hub areas for terms, as they call them, for maybe physics or biology labs, chemistry labs, because right now they are at a disadvantage. And as noted, a lot of our kids in rural Alaska aren't graduating at the rate they should. It's the system that's failing our kids. It's not the kids that are failing, it's the system. And in order to help those kids, you've got to be able to make sure that we have enough programs that are comparable to urban Alaska. It's going to be very difficult to build comprehensive schools in every single one of our villages with 100 people or 150 people. But in the home region, and we're not talking about shipping kids out. This is the narrative is that I want to ship kids to Oklahoma like we did 100 years ago. That is not the case. What I want to do is beef up what we have in the regional areas like Kotzebue, Nome, Barrow, Bethel, so that kids can go to school there, potentially take some college classes at the local community or the local colleges there, University of Alaska, and potentially also be trained in blue-collar work. But it's to enhance, not to take away.
What?
Thank you. Senator Begich, the question is, can you please explain your views on the current funding formula?
Thank you. I think the funding formula as it is today needs to be protected. One of the plans that I've put out is, as you know, the PFD is at great risk. Every year it's going to be now debated by the legislature, and I don't trust them to do the right thing at the end of the day. There are some I will. My brother serves there, so I have to say that. But I will tell you this, that what I'd like to do is put the PFD into the Constitution, protecting 50% of its flow to make sure you have an average about $2,100 plus growing. But the other half goes right to your question. We need to protect education. I want to put the formula, the education funding, into the Constitution because this is how we protect it so it's not on the cutting block every single session. And yes, this year they don't do it. This year they don't do it because it's an election year. We need to protect it, but we need to add one more piece, pre-K. There's no question early education is the best investment we can make. So the formula that I've laid out protects education and adds on top of it to make sure we ensure that every kid in this state, no matter where they live, who they are, what they make, that they can have early education. That's how we do it and get it out of the hands of the politicians every single year, that slice and dice education for their own benefit. We need to protect it. It's the greatest equalizer for everyone in this state if we make sure it's funded properly and protected for generations to come.
I don't want to get in trouble, so I'm going to start with Senator Begich this time. A vast majority of Alaska Natives, 120,000 Native people, rely on subsistence for food security and for their nutrition economies and traditional value. With Sturgeon pending against the U.S. Supreme Court, what is your position on protecting the subsistence priority in federal law?
Well, first off, I don't support the Sturgeon case, and the state of Alaska should not be a co-partner in that case. It will damage subsistence in the long term. It will reopen the Katie John issue. And let me say this, I've been to fish camps, I've been out there, and I have to say the best part of going out to rural Alaska is sitting and listening, especially to the elders of there and what they're seeing in regards to the impact of what can happen when subsistence rights are at risk. But we need to do something. Not just talk about it every year, but we need to finalize and put it into the Constitution to protect the rights of Alaska Natives for generations to come. This is important. And when I was When I was on the Anchorage Assembly many years ago here, we actually it was through my initiative to put on the ballot locally to support an initiative, an advisory vote to the legislature to make sure that they do the right thing. They have not done the right thing. As governor, I will do everything in my power to make sure we protect this for generations to come. But it is an important part of not only the survival, but the culture and the heritage and the future of rural Alaska, the subsistence rights that you enjoyed today.
Do you need me to repeat?
Thank you. I understand how important subsistence is. Once again, I lived out there for 19 years with the folks in rural Alaska. My family's from out there. We partook in subsistence. It's very important, and I'll do everything I can to protect it. With regard to the sturgeon case, that is a states' rights case. And the issue there is navigable waters. Can Alaskans use the navigable waters in the state of Alaska? And so I support the sturgeon case. However, if in fact the subsistence issue is overturned by the Supreme Court, I will work very quickly to work with stakeholders across the state of Alaska, in rural Alaska, to ensure that we can protect subsistence for generations to come.
Thank you. The next question concerns health care. The Affordable Health Care Act permanently reauthorized the Indian Health Care Improvement Act, which brought the entire IHS system, including tribal and urban programs and clinics, into the new system of health care delivery. Senator Begich, how do you feel about the Affordable Health Care Act?
Well, how do I feel about it? According to everybody that ran against me 4 years ago, I was the 60th vote that made sure the Affordable Care Act made it. And I stand by that. And I stand not only, the issue you brought up was an interesting one. I remember sitting with Senator Udall and a couple other senators, and we thought of an idea to make sure we would permanently authorize the Indian Health Care Act by slipping it into the Affordable Care Act because it was overdue. 21 years of never reauthorizing. Now it is permanently reauthorized. The Affordable Care Act is important. The other piece is the piece around Medicaid. There's a lot of pre-existing conditions, other pieces that are important. But Medicaid is an important expansion. It ensures that working Alaskans finally have health care. This is an important part of our survival as a community. There are many big employers in the state that don't pay livable wages, and what happens? The individuals working there don't have the quality health care they need. So I was very proud to support it, and I will do everything from the governor's office when the Washington, D.C. tries to push against it, try to change it, to fight every single day to make sure it continues and that we improve on it and make sure that Alaskans receive the benefit of the Affordable Care Act.
I wholeheartedly support access to affordable care for all Alaskans, no matter where they live, for all Americans, as a matter of fact. The issue with the Affordable Care Act is it's built on shaky ground. It's unsustainable. You've got premiums that are skyrocketing, deductibles that are increasing, lack of insurance. There's lack of insurance options under Obamacare. A lot of the co-ops are failing. We've got to shore that up at the federal level. Here in the state of Alaska, we have to make sure that we're managing our health and social service programs well. Just the other day, we met with a group of providers that were overpaid by almost overpaid by almost $160 million. Now, that money now has to be clawed back from the providers, and we probably will end up paying a penalty to the federal government for that overpayment. So we have to manage these programs better. We have to make sure that they're sustainable. And the other thing that we have to do, a little bit outside of healthcare though, is we have to continue to grow this economy so we can produce the revenue to help pay for these programs. If we don't do that, a lot of these programs are destined to be unsustainable, and it's going to impact a lot of folks in Alaska.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Dunleavy for this. On that same vein, not counting wasteful payments or fraudulent payments under Medicaid, will you work to protect Medicaid in Alaska?
I will work to make sure that that program is sustainable and it's on a solid basis moving forward, and that's my intent.
I have to say, before all the debates started and everything, there was some great commentary about always ask about the details of the question, and this is an important part of the question. It wasn't really answered, and here's how the answer should be. Medicaid, which is the expansion, 90% of it is federally supported, 10%. It's the best deal we could ever have gotten to help 44,000 Alaskans. This is the right program to make sure we have the right health care. Now, saying that, can we do some things differently to make it even better? And here's what I think about this. You have a program that 95% of the people on Medicaid, their services are covered at some point. They're not denied the payment. It takes sometimes appeals and so forth, but 95%. But 30% of it is the cost for administration. Here's what I want to do. I don't care if you work for a tribal consortium, a doctor's office, a hospital. I want to pay those general practitioners $250,000. That's their average pay. You pay, but you have to take every single Medicaid patient, and what we will do in exchange, no more paperwork. We're going to cut 30% out of the cost. And when you think from Alaska's perspective, we spend about $800 million. You could cut $200+ million out of that and deliver better services, and it will be delivered to the people that desperately need it, because access is part of the problem. Not just the price, but where can you get a Medicaid service provider? This will help solve the problem. We, again, have to change the paradigm of healthcare in this way and deliver. 70% of the people in Medicaid are chronic illness, and we need to do more preventive programs to make sure they are not coming back over and over again and make sure their health is better for the long term. This is what we should do with our Medicaid system. I don't know what Senator Dunleavy said there because it wasn't very detailed, but it is a base program, and we need to enhance it to make sure it works for the people and we get access and better care every single day.
Thank you, Senator Begich. And we will give Senator Dunleavy an opportunity to further clarify his answer. Can you please let us know how you propose addressing the need for health care access among Alaska's most vulnerable?
Again, the best thing to do, I think, is look at some private healthcare approaches, some market approaches, making sure that the programs that we currently have in place are managed well. And that's important. We have a number of programs in place that currently are not being managed well. Those programs in our Medicaid and other health and social service programs that we deliver, they have to be managed better, because what's happening is, again, as I mentioned earlier, we have overpayments. We have payments that should not be occurring. We are going to have to switch from using our UGF funding over to federal funding, which we should have done before. So we need to make sure that the actual programs that we have are working before we expand out. Once we get those programs working, then we can have a discussion about expanding Medicaid. But at this point, it's on shaky ground.
All right. Senator Dunleavy, tribal nations are America's first governments, and our role in the American family of governments is written into the Constitution. Treaties, executive orders, acts of Congress, and court decisions. Like state and foreign governments, tribes have the inherent power to govern their people and their lands. Should tribal court powers be expanded, kept the same, or reduced?
I would be willing to sit down. I'm more than happy to sit down, actually, with folks in having a discussion with the tribal courts. As long as we stay within the confines of the U.S. Constitution and the state of Alaska, I see a benefit in actually having a discussion to expand the powers of tribal courts in rural Alaska and for Native Alaska.
Senator Begich?
Thank you. Well, first off, the state has, just like the federal government, the state must recognize tribes, pure and simple. And you can rest assured, and I want to give credit to Governor Walker for that recognition. I want to continue that if I'm elected as governor. But also, tribal courts have incredible opportunity. We've seen the success. We need to look at what we can expand, because anytime you have courts that are dealing with your own communities, the impact is much greater. I have seen it when I've been out to communities. I've seen it across the state. But I also would want to increase tribal compacts. For example, when you talked about education, we will have some great challenges in some of our villages. We should be starting to examine what's the right way to maybe engage tribes in helping us deliver education in a different way within our tribal communities that are not being done today. But I absolutely would support. But I think we have seen the value through our healthcare system when we partner and figure out how to deliver more relative care, maybe in healthcare, education, court systems on the local level. That has an impact. Maybe I'm biased because I was a mayor and that's what I believe. Get it out of state, bring it home. This is where we can make the delivery much better in your local communities. So I would absolutely support it, and I also would continue what Governor Walker's people have been doing, and that is ensuring that tribes are part of the equation on a regular basis, not just once in a while when they have to check at a box, but doing it on a regular basis and full engagement.
The next set of questions involves voting. Alaska Natives were among the last in the nation to achieve suffrage and still continue to experience unequal treatment under the law when it comes to the ballot box. Senator Dunleavy, what measures will you take to ensure that early voting is on par in rural Alaska as it is in the urban epicenters?
Well, thank you. And historically speaking, there has been, I think, a terrible injustice when it comes to voting. So we would want to make sure that the ballots are in the language of the folks in the areas in Alaska, whether it's Yupik and Yupak, Athabascan. We want to make sure that those ballots are printed in a manner that folks can read them. If there needs to be folks to actually interpret those ballots and have oral interpreters there to help folks understand what's on the ballot, I'm in full support of that. And what I want to be able to do is sit down with Lieutenant Governor Meyer, when he's elected, and have that discussion and bring in folks from rural Alaska, stakeholders, to make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's so that there is no one that's going to be disenfranchised.
Go ahead. First off, I think it's important to listen to the communities to figure out what's the best way to approach this. But your question on early voting, which is really important, especially in the summertime, when, as you all know, there's subsistence going on and we got to make sure that people participate. This last election, primary, we only had 18% of the population show up. That is not acceptable for us as a state. And I would do a couple things. One, emphasizing the point that not only the voter guide should have at least, as already done with one language, but continue to expand that, but also the website, people who access it have multiple languages that they can touch. Also, I think the one solution to this, we did it here in Anchorage, and that is mail-in ballot, making sure everyone gets their ballot delivered to their home, and then they can vote. This, just here in Anchorage, it became a record turnout. But more importantly, it was the areas of our community that had the least voter population turnout for decades, and some of the most impoverished parts of our city had the highest, some of the highest 2-3 times turnout, because for the first time they were enfranchised. They had a ballot in their hand. They could discuss it. And when you talk about early voting and getting that ballot 3 weeks ahead of time so you can discuss it, have conversation, get information, this is the ultimate solution to figuring out how we make sure everyone has access to voting, but making sure the languages are a part of it, but also the information pamphlets. But early voting can be accomplished through a mail-in ballot over the long haul.
Thank you. Thank you to our candidates that came this afternoon. Thank you to Senator Dunleavy and Senator Begich, Nicole and Hallie for your help. At this time, I would like to invite the candidates to make some closing remarks. I believe we opened with Senator Dunleavy, so we will open the closing remarks with Senator Mark Begich.
Thank you again. Thank you for doing this today to get a chance to see the differences between the candidates. You know, this election, as I said at the beginning, is important. It will determine the future not only for the next session, the session after that, but it will determine the future for 10 and 15 and 20 years and beyond, because we have to make some tough decisions. What kind of education system are we going to have to make sure the fastest growing population, the millennials, aren't leaving our state, which they are, giving them a chance and hope. People who want to be a nurse, for example, have to wait 2 years at the university just to get into the program. But as soon as they come out, they get a job immediately in the fastest growing industry. We have to create the hope that when people walk outside their home, may they be in rural Alaska or here in urban Alaska, that they feel safe. If you have a safe community, you can have a growing community. But it will take all of us working together. What makes us unique as Alaskans, as you saw today with Governor Walker, when you put Alaska first, when you focus on the unity of all of us working together, we are bound by a common thread. That's what makes us unique. The debate of ideas is important. But at the end of the day, we have to move Alaska forward into the future. That's what I want to do as your governor. That's what I want to do with you, listening every day about the ideas that come from people within this conference today, but all across this state, to make this state the best it can be. Because I believe we have incredible opportunities ahead of us. And we can do better than where we are today, but we cannot do it better by individuals, but collectively we can. I would enjoy your help in supporting this campaign. We have just a few weeks, 2.5 left, and every vote matters. thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to working with you as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Senator Mike Dunleavy.
Thank you for this opportunity. It's been fantastic to be here today. It's good to see old friends and once again relatives. I came to Alaska back in 1983, went out to rural Alaska in 1984, as I mentioned in Koik, and thought I died and went to heaven. I met so many great people, had so many great experiences. As mentioned, we moved north to Kotzebue after my father-in-law passed away to be closer to our mother's family. And I was a teacher out there, principal, superintendent. I lived out there with the folks in rural Alaska. I was there for their funerals. I was there for the birth of their children. I was there to experience hunting, fishing, trapping, lived the life out there. We had our address out there. We had our mail sent out there. We built a home in rural Alaska. And so rural Alaska is the place, once again, where I fell in love with this entire state. We have a lot to do to fix the state of Alaska. There's varying ideas, different ideas on how we're going to do that. I believe we can put our resources to work for us. I believe there's great opportunities, such as Red Dog Mine, such as potentially Donlin, other mine finds throughout the state of Alaska. And a lot of these resources are in rural Alaska. It could put rural Alaskans to work. Once we do that, we're able to get folks off of some of these government programs. We're able to make sure that our kids have better schools. We're going to make sure that our kids are the beneficiaries of better public safety. We have some of the worst crime rates in the nation in Alaska. And unfortunately, in rural Alaska, those crime rates are even higher. We're going to focus on reducing crime. We're going to focus on reducing sexual assault against women. We're going to focus on having better schools. As mentioned, we can have small schools in rural Alaska if we make sure that they have an opportunity to be able to take better classes, labs, as we mentioned earlier. And so working together, making sure that we develop our resources, making sure that we focus on things like crime, better schools, we are going to build a better Alaska together. So there's two different views on how this is done, and I'm just looking forward to having more discussions with you. Look forward to your vote on November 6th, and there is only 18 days left, so don't be surprised if there's more surprises along the way. Thank you.
Thank you to both our candidates for joining us this afternoon. It was a very meaningful discussion. We're educating our voters. There are pamphlets as well for you to learn more about the candidates. Be sure to vote very soon. Early voting will open on Monday, I believe, so the voting opportunity is right around the corner. Guyana night begins at 7 o'clock.
Courageous statement that he made today, as I said just a few minutes ago. And I think, his message is a great message. And it's about unity and focused on moving Alaska forward. And that, I think, is very clear what he said. And I give him a lot of credit. He put Alaska first. And again, focus on the future of Alaska is what this campaign is about.
What conversations did you guys have in the last couple of days to maybe join forces?
What I'd say is we've had conversations for some time on a variety of things, how to move Alaska forward in a unified way.
And would you put him in your administration if you can?
I appreciate your comment and question, but again, we're looking forward to this race. It's all about the future of Alaska, and I think what you hear today, what you heard from the governor, is a desire to see Alaska put first and making sure that we're unified in our approach. We may have some differences, but at the end of the day, it's about unifying Alaska, because we have great challenges ahead of us. You saw a little bit of differences here between myself and Senator Dunleavy on rural issues, and I think it's important that we move forward and focus on Alaska's future.
Senator Begich, can you say, will Walker have a role in your campaign at all moving forward?
What I've said today, you saw what he talked about, and I agree with him, that this is about putting Alaska first and making sure that we are focused on what's best for Alaska's future. And, we have a lot of ideas that we've been in debates together, and some that I like that he's talked about, some I think he liked about some of the stuff we talked about, but at the end of the day, today's about moving Alaska forward. We got 18 days to talk about the issues that are important. Today you saw a little bit of it with rural Alaska.